During the Iran war, oil and gas shipments through the Strait of Hormuz dropped by 94%, causing a global supply shortage and forcing governments to implement measures to reduce energy usage. In the EU, which still imports more than 50% of its energy, the crisis has revived conversations about European energy independence and nuclear power, with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen calling Europe's nuclear power phase-out a strategic mistake, and the European Commission unveiling a new strategy for nuclear reactors last month. So in this video, we'll take another look at the ongoing energy crisis, Europe's long debate about nuclear power, and why the EU is now trying to revive it. We've heard a lot of talk about Europe de-risking or decoupling from the US recently. So in the latest issue of our magazine, we thought we'd discuss whether it's actually feasible and why Europe could still struggle without US backing. That's just one of the 72 pages in the magazine, because as always, there's more to Too Long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. Now, the first thing we should say is that while Europe has shifted away from nuclear energy in recent decades, European policymakers were previously quite optimistic about it. In 1957, Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands signed the Euratom Treaty, or officially, the treaty establishing the European Atomic Energy Community, with the aim of establishing a common nuclear energy market and cooperating on the development of nuclear power. As a result, between 1957 and the late 80s, nuclear power plants were being built all over Europe, and by 1989, there were around 134 nuclear reactors in operation. In the late 20th century, however, and in particular after the 1986 Chernobyl disaster, public opinion began to turn on nuclear energy, which was also tarnished by its association with nuclear weapons. As a result, several European countries began phasing out nuclear energy. In 1990, around a third of Europe's electricity was produced by nuclear power, but today that figure is around 15%. Over the past 30 years, only 14 reactors were started up, while 39 were shut down, leading to a loss of around 25 reactors. Over the past year, however, there's been a renewed push for nuclear energy in Europe. Italy is preparing to draft laws to repeal its 40-year ban on nuclear power. The Belgian parliament voted to reverse a 2003 law for the phase-out of nuclear power. The Netherlands is planning to build 2 new nuclear power plants by 2035. And even Greece, an earthquake-prone country historically cautious about nuclear power due to safety concerns, announced last month that it will be setting up a ministerial council to look at small-scale nuclear development. Last year, Germany also announced that it would drop its long-standing opposition to including nuclear power as a form of renewable energy under EU law, ending a long-running debate with France, Europe's major nuclear power, which derives around 70% of its energy from nuclear power. More recently, on March 10th at the Nuclear Energy Summit in Paris, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described Europe's nuclear power phase-out in the 2010s as a strategic mistake. And the European Commission also published a new report entitled Strategy for the Development and Deployment of Small Modular Reactors, SMRs, in Europe, aiming to help supply low-carbon electricity domestically and build, quote, a strong EU supply chain. So why is Europe accelerating a push for nuclear energy? Well, it's essentially about improving Europe's energy independence. First highlighted by Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Europe's dependence on fossil fuel imports has proven to be a major vulnerability, with Europe's economic stability basically dependent on political developments in other countries. One recent example of Europe's exposure to geopolitical shocks is the energy supply shortage triggered by the Iran war. As you'll know by now, Iran responded to the US and Israel's attacks by effectively closing the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway through which about 20% of the world's oil supplies pass in normal times, by striking tankers, forcing up insurance costs, and making it extremely dangerous for ships to transit. Simultaneously, Iran has attacked energy facilities in the Persian Gulf, striking over 40 assets across 9 countries in the Middle East, including Bahrain's oil refinery in Sitra, Kuwait's Shuaibah petrochemicals facilities, Qatar's Ras Laffan gas fields, the world's largest liquefied natural gas production site, and Saudi Arabia's oil refineries. While Iran has agreed to stop its retaliatory strikes if attacks against Iran are halted, significant damage has already been caused to Gulf energy production, with long-lasting impacts for countries that import fossil fuels from the Persian Gulf. Nearly a fifth of Qatar's total LNG export capacity has been destroyed, with repairs expected to take up to 5 years. And the 94% decline in average daily shipping flows during the war led to a significant drop in oil exports from the Middle East. According to Bloomberg, fuel exports fell by 88% compared to the pre-war average, jet fuel by 85%, naphtha used by petrochemical production by 73%, liquefied petroleum gas by 65%, and diesel by 55%. Some disruption is likely to persist even with the agreed ceasefire, as there'll be a lag in restarting oil shipments, and there's still a huge risk to vessels passing through the strait, which could get trapped if the ceasefire breaks down. As such, Europe has been preparing for a long-lasting energy shock, with 4 airports in Italy introducing restrictions on jet fuel this week, and 5 EU countries, Austria, Germany, Italy, Portugal and Spain, writing a letter to Brussels urging the EU to impose a windfall tax on energy companies to, quote, alleviate the burden on the general public. The EU's Energy Commissioner also said last week that the bloc was assessing all possibilities to offset potential supply shortages, including fuel rationing and releasing emergency oil reserves, saying that the Iran-induced energy shock would be a long crisis. With the hostilities still far from resolved, nuclear power is being seen as a domestic energy solution, helping Europe offset price hikes caused by the instability in both Russia and the Middle East. The European Commission's new SMR strategy aims at getting SMRs operational by the early 2030s, which will support European industry, energy security and affordability, with France, the EU's most nuclear-reliant nation, enjoying some of the lowest energy prices in Western Europe. Finally, public sentiment also appears to be shifting in favour of nuclear energy. According to the Eurobarometer survey, most Europeans see nuclear energy more positively today compared to a few years ago. This suggests a growing consensus around the need for nuclear to form part of a stable, reliable energy mix that allows Europe to better weather major geopolitical shocks. As we mentioned earlier, the latest version of our magazine, Too Long, is out now. And if you subscribe using code TLDR26, then you can get £4 off your first copy, bringing the price as low as $3.99, our lowest ever price, as well as getting you 20% off every future issue as long as you stay subscribed. Speaking of future editions, let me show you for the very first time this summer's edition of the magazine, currently entitled Trump's Rules of War. This map on the cover shows a dot for every region struck by Trump since returning to office last year, and there's always the chance that it will look even redder before we go to print. Inside this issue, we'll be running through each of the different conflicts, airstrikes, and incursions.
A little excursion to take care of nuclear weaponry?
Sorry, excursions. So if you want to track that timeline with us and better understand what's motivating Trump here, then you'll want a copy of this summer's Too Long. We'll be discussing that along with a whole load of other topics. Luckily, if you subscribe today, you'll not only get the spring issue immediately, but you'll also be signed up for this summer too, ensuring that this issue lands through your letterbox or in your inbox as soon as possible.